This particular presentation is based on a program which we first aired on one of our radio broadcasts nationwide on our network of stations. It was on Thursday, May 21, and a couple of birthday names just jumped out at us on that day, which had a kind of tie-in to this parable about a king who throws a free wedding banquet for all of the down-and-outers of the world. Now, probably young people won't remember who Mr. T was, but stick around. It just happened to be the 100th birthday, 1998, of the great philanthropist Armand Hammer, who gave away millions of dollars to pet projects like cancer research and humanitarian aid to Russia. Also, the anniversary of the 1991 death of Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. He was killed by an exploding bomb hidden in a bouquet of flowers some 7 years after his mother, Indira Gandhi, was also assassinated. And so we thought of how Jesus was assassinated in order to pay the price for this great wedding feast. And we call that a birthday card to Mr. T. You're going to think this third birthday card is kind of odd, but the infamous Mr. T turned 46 years old on that very day, May 21, 1998. Maybe you remember him starring in the A-Team or in WWF wrestling matches with his mohawk hair and tons of gold jewelry all over. Or maybe you recall the line that he made famous in one of the Rocky movies where he vowed that he would beat up on the Italian stallion, Sylvester Stallone. "I pity the fool," he snarled, and it became his tagline. Why in the world would I mention a birthday bad boy like Mr. T? Well, fasten your seatbelt. We're getting close, finally, to the finish line of this parable of Jesus, where a king sends out wedding invitations to all the undeserving pond scum type people of the world. A free invitation, and then also a free wedding garment, a tuxedo or a designer gown to wear to the big event. And right here in this story, as Christians really try to determine biblically what this wedding robe truly is, a debate breaks out and also some great concern. Here's why. Obviously, that wedding garment represents righteousness, holiness, obedience, purity, commandment keeping. And so it gets very disquieting when we get to the end of the story, and here's what happens beginning in Matthew 22, verse 11. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. "Friend," he asked, "how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" The man was speechless. And what happens next? This is very sobering. Then the king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen." So we have a wedding that is free. Everyone is invited to attend with no upfront fee being charged. But once inside, this question is asked. Have you got on the proper robe? Are you sufficiently dressed? Are you righteous? And a man who stands there speechless when that question is asked is unceremoniously thrown out to the wolves, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth and maybe even some hot flames. And we head into a tunnel here of bad news, good news. Because Christians read this Bible story and they get to this part where the king comes in to see the guests. In fact, he's almost inspecting them, it seems. This is kind of a judgment scene. Who's got on the wedding garment, a robe of righteousness? It's clear from this story that at least one stubborn or maybe ignorant attendee doesn't have on the tuxedo and is thrown out. And so we begin to say, wait a minute, if this story is true, then my assurance of salvation is shaken and shattered. How can I know if the king won't approve of what I'm wearing either? I'm certainly not as righteous as some of the others in my church, not as well-dressed, character-wise, as they are. This is bad news. Well, it isn't bad news after all, because as we already discovered, the king provides the robe. It's given out free. You receive one, I receive one. We all receive one. In one commentary, the writers make this suggestion: the wedding garment represents the righteousness of Christ. Hence, the rejection of the garment represents the rejection of those traits of character that qualify men to become sons and daughters of God, like the guests in the parable. We have nothing suitable of our own to wear. We are acceptable in the presence of the great God only when clad in the perfect righteousness of Jesus Christ by virtue of his merits. So, what sounded like bad news isn't bad news at all, because when the king comes in to see his guests, and when he comes by your banquet table, where the white linen is so sparkling white and the candles are twinkling in the darkness, and his eyes fall on you, what does he see? He sees the robe of Christ's perfect righteousness covering your sins. You appear in his eyes just as his own son, Jesus, does. Perfect, sinless, loyal, loving, obedient. He looks at you and he says, Jesus' heart, Jesus' holiness, that's what he sees. And he says, welcome to the feast for my son. In fact, you look a lot like him. I'm so glad you're here. Now back for a moment now to big bad enemy stomping Mr. T and his birthday. Los Angeles Times columnist Mike Downey tells us something that maybe we didn't know. Mr. T, it's been reported, he said, has cancer. What's more, he's a born-again Christian. Along with the chemotherapy for skin cancer, he has on the robe of Jesus' righteousness at this very moment. He tells us what happened when he heard the bad news. Mr. T said, I got down on my knees to pray. I said, Lord, give me the strength that you gave Abraham, that you gave Joseph, that you gave Moses, that you gave Job. Because how would I know that my God is a healer if I never got sick? My God would be a fair weather God if he was only with me when I got millions of dollars from doing the A-Team and commercials and whatnot. I don't want no fair weather God. I want a God who will be with me through everything. Well, that's the testimony of Mr. T. He didn't want to be covered by boxing trunks or by his gold necklaces or his mohawk. He wanted to be covered by the robe of Jesus' righteousness. But now, what seems to be good news, the very best in fact, takes us into another area of deep Christian debate. We wear this robe of Christ's righteousness. It's beautiful. It's free. We join Mr. T in thanking God for such a wonderful free tuxedo or evening gown. But now the disturbing question. Is this robe simply and exclusively the righteousness and goodness and holiness of Jesus Christ, which covers over our wickedness? Or is this robe a kind of righteousness which Christ gives to us to the point where we ourselves are good and holy? Does he in fact come in and actually make his people good? Or put it this way, will heaven's banquet hall be inhabited by people who are forever wicked and sin-stained but only covered up by someone else's million-dollar tuxedo? Some theologians refer to this as legal fiction, where the whole universe has to forever pretend that bad people are good. Other Bible scholars debate about whether the holy character of Jesus is imputed to believers, in other words, simply credited to us in a mathematical sense, or imparted to us, where his goodness is in reality given to his people and they actually become people who love righteousness. Well, it's a big question, and that makes this a bad point for a chapter break. But you can see how a person's insecurities might come surging back. If this robe of righteousness has to in any way be my own righteousness, then I begin to worry, because maybe I don't see much progress in that department. And I hear the trumpet sounding as the great King of the universe begins to wind his way through the banquet pavilion, about to inspect the wardrobes of his guests. But just a closing word. And again, you and I return to the mohawk-haired Mr. T, this snarling, scowling, I pity the fool, sneering bad boy of wrestling and television. Well, he became a Christian. Now he's got the robe of Jesus covering him. But lo and behold, something actually happened to this man inside. That robe he's wearing has actually become him. He became unbelievably loving and tender, soft-spoken and kind. And he told Downey, that writer, how he began spending his time in children's cancer wards, quoting the Bible to them, visiting with kids for hours. He talks about his mother, how she raised him and his 11 siblings. His dad was a junk man who preached on Sundays. And then Mr. T said this: we were poor financially, but we were rich spiritually. Drugs and crime were all over me, under me, and around me, but never in me. Why? Because I respected my mother. I'm a big, overgrown mama's boy. That's the problem with society. We don't have enough mama's boys. If we had more mama's boys, there wouldn't be so much disrespect for women. And Downey said to Mr. T, it must have been hard telling your mom about your cancer. And here's the end of the column. And for the next few minutes in the restaurant, without a word, the biggest, strongest, roughest, toughest, baddest dude you'd ever want to meet is crying his eyes out while I hold his hand. You would want to meet him. Believe me, I pity the fool who never gets the chance. And so we had at the end of the show, we said, happy birthday, Mr. T, a son of God.